Good morning, students. Let's take a look at our morning message. May 20th, 2020. Dear students, let's get back to Thomas Jefferson. How many facts can you remember, Mrs. Kilmer? Okay, so let's get back to Thomas Jefferson, and if you'll remember in our classroom, we can try to count some facts. I remember he was the president, he was the third president. I remember he wrote the Declaration of Independence. I remember that he was the father of UVA, of the University of Virginia. Oh, and I remember he's from Virginia. How many facts can you remember about Thomas Jefferson? Take a moment to turn to someone nearby and see if you can tell them a few. And by the way, I got an email from someone who must have named at least 8 or 9 or more. So a lot of you I know are already starting to remember good stuff. And in a minute, I'm going to read to you a nonfiction book about Jefferson, a biography, right? Here we go. Thomas Jefferson, Heroes of the American Revolution. Oh, I think this must be a series. So there are other heroes in the series like Alexander Hamilton and Benjamin Franklin. And on the front, I see a portrait of Thomas Jefferson. And here I see some other people from revolutionary times, including there's Benjamin Franklin. He's another cool inventor, like Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, Heroes of the American Revolution. And on the title page, I see Thomas Jefferson's face on Mount Rushmore. I'm making a connection to the book about George Washington's mom. And it's funny, in that book on the title page, I remember they had George Washington's mother's face, Mary Ball, carved on Mount Rushmore in a picture, like a little joke. Let's see, this is by Don McLeese, Rourke Publishing. Ooh, table of contents, lots of stuff here. An American leader, early years, moving to Tuckahoe, school days, away from home, his father's death. Wow, so all of that information just about when he's young. I think this will be fun for us. Then becoming a lawyer, voice for freedom, marrying Martha, the Continental Congress, words to live by. Okay, so maybe that's kind of the middle of his life when he's a lawyer and there's all the action around the Revolution. Then home to Virginia, a great American. Timeline, glossary, index. Okay. Chapter 1, an American leader. Thomas Jefferson was a great thinker and writer who became one of the best presidents of the United States. During the Revolutionary War, he was one of the most famous and important American leaders. America no longer wanted to be ruled by England. Americans wanted to elect, that means vote for, their own leaders. In 1776, America declared its freedom from England by issuing the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration, with some help, with its famous words that all men are created equal. Jefferson believed in democracy, where voting gives Americans an equal voice in their government. After the Declaration of Independence that Jefferson wrote, America won its war with England and earned the freedom to become its own country. And here's Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson, who were the 3 main writers of the Declaration of Independence. And Benjamin Franklin never became a president, but he was a very famous person who invented lots of cool stuff. And he also was always inventing and thinking of ways to help people. We sometimes get to study him, not this year. And John Adams, that was the 2nd president of the United States. We've seen him before in some other books. Early years. Thomas Jefferson was born on April 13th, 1743 in Virginia. His family was very wealthy. See, we've kind of noticed, we thought he must be rich by some of the other facts we've been learning in other books, but this really confirms it. His family was very wealthy and lived on a large 2,500-acre farm that they called Shadwell. His father, Peter Jefferson, was one of the most respected men in the area. Thomas's mother, Jane Randolph Jefferson, was from one of the oldest families in Virginia. Thomas's mother loved to write, and her son would share that love. He was the third child in his family with 6 sisters and a brother. And here it says calendar change. Thomas was born 9 years before the calendar changed to the one we use now. His birth date on the calendar used then was April 2nd. The new calendar changed the date to April 3rd. That's interesting. And here is a picture of a map drawn by Peter Jefferson and Joshua Fry. So this is just a picture from the map, from a map that was drawn by his dad. So I'm going to just stop and think. So they were really wealthy. The mom was loved to write, was a real writer, and even the dad was interested, I guess, in making maps, and obviously very well-educated people, people who knew, who read a lot, and who could write very well. Moving to Tuckahoe. When Thomas was 3 years old, he and his family left Shadwell and moved to another farm called Tuckahoe. It was 50 miles away and took 3 days for the Jeffersons to reach by horses and carts. Tuckahoe was owned by William Randolph, who was Peter's friend and Jane's cousin. After William died, the Jeffersons moved from their house to his nicer one to take care of it. Okay, so he's kind of related. They're all a little bit related to each other. Thomas had little memory of those early years in Shadwell. Instead, he remembered Tuckahoe as his boyhood home. And there's a school, an elementary school in Arlington called Tuckahoe, right? There was a one-room country schoolhouse behind the Tuckahoe house, and it was here that Thomas first learned to read and write. And it says Thomas Jefferson attended school at the Tuckahoe schoolhouse. And here's an old picture. I don't know if it's there anymore, but that shows the Tuckahoe schoolhouse where Jefferson actually went to school. And here, I'm noticing something about this information book, this biography. Not only does it have the things we are used to, like headings to tell you what's in that section, pictures, captions, right, the small writing that explains about the picture, but it also has this thing that in some books they kind of called a sidebar. Maybe it's like some information on the side in a box, just extra information that you might be interested in. Because remember, back here we found calendar change, like that's kind of a cool fun fact. And here I think there's a fun fact about one-room schoolhouse. Today students are taught in different rooms for different grades depending on the age of the student. Back then, children of all different ages were taught in one room. Okay, so there's a fun fact about one-room schoolhouses. School days. Thomas was 5 years old when he first went to the school. The private teacher hired by his father taught Thomas arithmetic as well as reading and writing. In those days, it was important to write very clearly because there weren't any computers to type on. Thomas became very good at penmanship. Penmanship is the ability to write letters very clearly and well, and was known as a very smart student. And this is a picture of a colonial school teacher walking with her many students. It's an old picture. Another thing I think it's good to remember that it mentions that the father had to pay for a teacher for Jefferson. And you got to keep in mind, nowadays we have public school where everyone, all children in the United States are allowed, are entitled, they have the right to go to the public schools that are paid for by the government. But in those days, they didn't have that yet. They didn't have that yet. So if you wanted to learn, somehow your community had to pay for a teacher, or in this case, of course, his father was wealthy, so his father paid for a teacher for the school. Away from home. When Thomas was 9, his family moved back to Shadwell. There wasn't a good school there, and Thomas's father thought his son needed to learn. So the family sent Thomas away to live at a nearby school in Dover Creek. Thomas missed being home, but he learned a lot at school. He read a lot of the most famous books called classics. So those are like old books with old information that people thought was very important for everyone to learn and understand. Thomas lived during the school year for 5 years at Dover Creek. During the summer, he would return to Shadwell and help on the farm. That's interesting. So we had to live away at his school. That's called a boarding school. I actually went to boarding school for a few years when I was young also. And here's a picture. It says, learning was difficult for many colonial children. Yeah, because there wasn't equal opportunity, right? There weren't teachers for everybody, schools for everybody paid for by the government. Each community had to organize it. His father's death. In 1757, when Thomas was 14 years old, his father died. Peter Jefferson was only 49 years old, but people didn't live as long back then. Remember, we said they didn't have really good medicine, they didn't have good doctors. As the oldest son, Thomas became head of the family. He's head of the family and he's 14. He had to return home to take care of Shadwell. He still went to school, though, because he was very smart and wanted to do more with his life than run a farm. And this says, a scene of Virginia countryside similar to the land where Jefferson grew up. And that's actually a painting. That's an old painting that shows a countryside scene and gives you an idea of what things looked like back then. Just lots of forested countryside. Okay. Becoming a lawyer. When Thomas was 16, he went to the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg. And remember, we said you can still go there today. Only the very smartest students went to college in those days, and many of them went there when they were young, as Thomas did. During his years at college, Thomas learned a lot more about science, mathematics, and religion. He decided while he was there that he wanted to be a lawyer, so he started studying law as well. I think some of you guys have parents who are lawyers. He finished college after 2 years in 1762 and then went to work at a lawyer's office. He still studied law. In 1767, Thomas Jefferson became a lawyer. He was known as a very good one. Hey, I'm kind of making a connection to Abraham Lincoln, right? Who was known as a very good lawyer also. So this is a period drawing of the College of William and Mary. So this is a drawing that someone made back in the 1760s or 1770s of the College of William and Mary. And this is showing, I think, details of some of the kinds of what they call flora and fauna. Flora is plants and fauna is animals. So these are kind of the insects and different plants and trees that were on the campus at William and Mary. And I see a sidebar. What else are we going to learn? Passing the bar. In order to become a lawyer, then and now, you need to pass a test called the bar exam. This is what Thomas did in 1767. Okay. And a voice for freedom. In 1769, voters elected Thomas Jefferson to the House of Burgesses, which helped England govern the colony of Virginia. Remember, it's still before the Revolution, so England still owns Virginia. Thomas was not a great speaker, but he became known in the House as a great writer. So he wasn't so good at speaking. That's interesting. He was really good at writing. He took the side of those who felt that America should be free from Britain, that it should become its own country. Okay, and there is a portrait of Thomas Jefferson. Marrying Martha. In 1771, Thomas Jefferson fell in love with a woman named Martha Wales Skelton. She was a widow. Her father was a lawyer, just like Thomas. She loved music, and so did Thomas. They married on New Year's Day, January 1st, 1772, and he'd already started building Monticello, where he wanted to live. And this is a modern photo of Monticello. And there's a sidebar. Monticello. In Italian, Monticello means little mountain. Thomas built his mansion on a hill in Shadwell. the family farm of his boyhood. Monticello remains very famous, and many people visit the home every year. So that's interesting to think. Some of you I know have been to Monticello, but the famous Monticello is on the Shadwell estate, like where he lived when he was a little kid. The Continental Congress. In 1775, Virginia made Thomas one of its members of the Second Continental Congress. This Congress had many members who wanted America to become its own country. They appointed him to write the Declaration of Independence. He spent 17 days writing and rewriting it. And of course, he got some help too. And here is Independence Hall in Philadelphia, where the Declaration was signed. And there's another sidebar. The Second Continental Congress voted to approve the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776, and ever since we've called that Independence Day. Words to live by. In the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson wrote that all men are created equal and have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He also wrote that when a government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter the government or abolish. That means to kind of cancel or try to get rid of the government. So in other words, in the Declaration they wrote, and we've talked about that everybody's created equal and everybody has the right to try to make a good living. And if the government gets in the way of doing that, or the government is treating people unfairly, then the Declaration said that it's okay for us to rise up and try to change the government. That was the idea of the Declaration of Independence. And here's the signing of the Declaration of Independence. That's just like a famous picture that was made then. And there are the signers leaving Independence Hall. Again, though, I've got to say, I'm kind of remembering that he kept writing about how everybody is equal and everybody needs to be free, but he always had slaves. Home to Virginia. Jefferson didn't become a soldier or general to fight the Revolutionary War. He thought he could serve his country better by becoming part of the government of Virginia. He returned to Virginia in 1776 and helped make laws as a member of the House of Delegates, and then he was elected governor. In 1782, his wife died, which made Jefferson very sad. When Virginia elected Thomas Jefferson to the Congress in 1783, he hoped this would help him get over his sadness. And here's a portrait of him at the time of his wife's death. I guess he's looking a little sad. A great American. Thomas Jefferson continued to serve his country. He was elected president and is remembered as one of the best and most famous presidents in the country's history. During his presidency, the Louisiana Purchase almost doubled the size of our new country. But even if Jefferson had never become president, he would be remembered as an American hero for writing the Declaration of Independence. And it is fitting that he died at Monticello on July 4th, 1826, exactly 50 years after the Declaration was approved. And there's a little portrait of John Adams, the second president. And this is Jefferson when he was going to become president. So that's an interesting fact to remember, too, the idea that he wrote the Declaration of Independence and he died exactly 50 years after it was approved. Okay, so here's the timeline of his life. And here's a big, long glossary, because there were lots of kind of more tricky words in this book. Well, I hope you enjoyed learning those details about Thomas Jefferson's life. One reason I really like this book is it does give a lot more information about his early life when he was a kid growing up, and also about what life was like in the past for young people and children. The idea that school was something that just wasn't there all the time, that you couldn't count on school, that the community had to provide school, or if you were rich, you paid for someone to teach your children. And it reminds me how thankful, how lucky we are today that all children in our country have the right to go to school and get learning, get an education. And that's something I think that we can all be thankful for. So later this afternoon, I'll see you for our fun storybook.